Speaker John Bercow faces fight to hang on to his job amid major backlash over his decision to ban racist Trump from addressing Parliament. John Bercow is facing a fight to hang on to his job amid a major backlash over his grandstanding decision to ban Donald Trump from addressing Parliament. Furious Tory MPs are considering forcing a vote of no confidence in the Speaker after an extraordinary intervention in which he branded the U.S. President racist and sexist, and said he would not authorize the use of historic Westminster Hall during the impending state visit. The comments were cheered by many MPs in the chamber, who have been heavily critical of the travel ban imposed by the White House on nationals from 7 mainly Muslim countries. But there is a mounting backlash from politicians condemning Mr. Bercow for abandoning the Speaker's traditional neutrality and wading into international politics. Tory backbencher Alex Shelbrooke accused Mr. Bercow of grandstanding and student politics of the worst kind. He told Mail Online that the Speaker had effectively validated human rights abuses in other countries such as China, because they had been welcomed to Parliament. British Speaker John Bercow, pictured rebuking Donald Trump in the House of Commons, said his opposition to a speech in Parliament by Donald Trump had been increased by the president's migrant ban. U.S. President Donald Trump speaking to troops at MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa, Florida. Fellow conservative Nadhim Zahawi, another opponent of the U.S. travel ban, said Mr. Bercow should think about his position. At least one MP approached clerks last night asking about the process for calling a vote of no confidence in the Speaker, and soundings were being taken on support. Officials were said to have been open-mouthed at the vehemence of Mr. Bercow's comments. He is likely to be challenged on the issue when the House sits later. Cabinet Minister Sajid Javid made clear this morning that Mr. Bercow did not speak for the government. He insisted Mr. Trump would be made very welcome when the state visit takes place later this year, after Theresa May extended an invitation during her visit to the White House last month. Since the president's executive order on immigration was imposed, there have been mass protests in many cities, and more than 160 MPs have signed a motion calling for him to be denied the honor of speaking to both houses of Parliament. Mr. Bercow told MPs, "What I will say is this. An address by a foreign leader to both houses of Parliament is not an automatic right, it is an earned honor." Moreover, there are many precedents for state visits to take place to our country which do not include an address to both houses of Parliament. Before the imposition of the migrant ban, I would myself have been strongly opposed to an address by President Trump in Westminster Hall. After the imposition of the migrant ban by President Trump, I am even more strongly opposed to an address by President Trump in Westminster Hall. Mr. Bercow said he has less influence over whether a speech could be made by President Trump in the Royal Gallery, because it is in a different part of the building. But he told MPs it was customary for an invitation to be sent in the names of both Speakers of Parliament, himself and Lord Fowler. "I would not wish to issue an invitation to President Trump to speak in the Royal Gallery," he told MPs. Mr. Bercow concluded, "We value our relationship with the United States. If a state visit takes place that is way beyond and above the pay grade of the Speaker. However, as far as this place is concerned, I feel very strongly that our opposition to racism and to sexism and our support for equality before the law and an independent judiciary are hugely important considerations in the House of Commons." The speech was in response to a point of order raised by Labour MP Stephen Doughty. He spoke to highlight a Commons motion opposing Mr. Trump's speech. It has been signed by 163 MPs, mostly from Labour and the SNP. But the intervention was slammed by ex-UKIP leader Nigel Farage, who said, "For Speaker Bercow to uphold our finest parliamentary traditions, he should be neutral." No 10 sources played down the intervention, insisting the itinerary for the visit had not been set and would be discussed in due course. Mr. Shelbrooke told Mail Online, "I do not support the attitude or some of the policies of Donald Trump, but the Speaker must remain independent. I am concerned and upset that by declaring that Parliament is barring the democratically elected leader of our closest ally due to his racism and sexism, that we have said that the human rights abuses in countries such as China and Kuwait are okay as he welcomed them to Parliament. It is student politics of the worst kind, interested more in grandstanding than a consistent approach of dealing with world leaders with whom there are many national policies in their own countries that go against our principles and values. Mr. Zahawi said Mr. Bercow must think about his position and explain his remarks to Parliament. President Donald Trump and British Prime Minister Theresa May met at the White House last month where they attempted to rekindle the special relationship. Speaker Bercow raised no public objection to Chinese President Xi Jinping speaking to MPs and peers in the Royal Gallery in 2015. He watched on from the platform, pictured, he told BBC Radio 4's Today program, "I think it is, in my book, unwise," and he opens himself up to the accusation of hypocrisy. "That's my point. I just think it's unwise on the Queen's Sapphire Jubilee to take a political position so blatantly against the elected leader of our closest ally when we are urging them, as I was last week. I am against the travel ban, especially for banning refugees from Syria who are desperate, who have been vetted, but it's unwise to ban the legitimately elected President of the United States of America, our closest ally, when we're trying to urge them not to shoot from the hip, not to ban people, to exercise restraint, look at evidence. Yet we are now, or at least the Speaker of Parliament, who has a big responsibility, is now sort of talking the language of bans." Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Crispin Blunt, a Tory MP, said, he has no idea whether he will be speaking for a majority of the House of Commons, and this is why speakers do not express their opinion. That's the entire point, otherwise they can't remain neutral and above the political fray. There was also an angry response from the U.S., with Republican Congressman Joe Wilson telling Newsnight, "That's very disappointing, because if ever in recent years there's been a more pro-British president of the United States, it's Donald Trump." Critics privately put the chances of a confidence vote at 40%, pointing out that the government would probably abstain, meaning Mr. Bercow would probably survive with support from Labour MPs. He has pledged to stand down by next year regardless, when he will have served 9 years in the chair. Westminster Hall is the oldest and most hallowed of the British Parliament's buildings, dating back to 1097, and has been at the centre of the country's history. Only 5 foreign leaders since World War II have been invited to speak there, with Barack Obama one of them and the first U.S. president to be afforded the honor. Amid mass protests over the travel ban, which has been suspended by U.S. courts, the Commons is set to debate whether to cancel the visit later in the year. However, the result would only be symbolic. As Commons Speaker, Bercow is one of 3 individuals who control access to speaking rights at the Hall. The Trump Organization owns property in Scotland. Donald Trump gives a press conference on the 9th tee at his Trump Turnberry Resort on June 24, 2016 in Ayr, Scotland. Lord Ricketts, former permanent secretary to the British Foreign Office, previously raised doubts that Mr. Trump was specially deserving of this exceptional honor. He wrote that there is no precedent for a U.S. president paying a state visit to this country in their first year. Most have had to wait till their third, and added, "Now the Queen is put in a very difficult position." Speeches in the Hall are rare. Besides Obama, South African President Nelson Mandela and Burma freedom fighter Aung San Suu Kyi are among those who have been given the honor.